bit about consciousness, and my title is Why Consciousness is a Big Deal for Science, and what Gaudiya Vaishnava metaphysics can contribute, particularly to this discourse. As Brahmatirtha Bob Cohen mentioned, we recently attended the Science of Consciousness conference in Tucson, Arizona. Very important conference. It really is the event that explores what we need to establish within consciousness and how it relates to neuroscience, how it relates to psychology, and all these topics. And we were given a 4-hour workshop on the opening day for the BI to make its presentation under the title Top-Down Consciousness and Real-World Applications. And we were kind of leveraging, what we said, we were leveraging the knowledge of the Indian knowledge systems, and particularly drawing on Vedanta philosophy, Sankhya philosophy, and yoga philosophy, all from the Gaudiya perspective. So what I wanted to do today is just give a little flavor of what we try to achieve on in the talk that I presented on that day. It can only be a summary. We cannot get into great details in this summer school, but we want to excite you about the topics and to let you know there's much, much more on offer. So at the workshop, my purpose was to contribute insights from Vaishnava philosophy and metaphysics, and to reinforce the real problem of the hard problem related to qualia, because the Science of Consciousness conference is the home where, as was mentioned, David Chalmers, the philosopher, challenged the scientists that you're talking about consciousness through your science and your neuroscience and physics and everything, but you're not dealing with the real topics, the real hard problem. And we're going to look at that in a few moments. And we needed to help the philosophers and scientists distinguish the functions of mind and consciousness, because they tend to conflate that. And we wanted to offer a framework, a theoretical framework of fundamental consciousness that accounts for the issues of the interaction between a non-neural mind and the body and brain. A framework that can accommodate what we call anomalous observations, things that are out of the ordinary, which currently standard physicalist science can't deal with. We wanted to show that this framework offers testability, it offers predictions, and it has huge benefit in applications in psychology and neuroscience. And to deal with all of this, we have to take people back to the start. We need scientists to be more philosophically tuned, and we need philosophers to be more scientifically tuned. So in dealing with consciousness, we have to go back to the beginning. What's it all about? What are our axioms? And standard in Western philosophy is to draw on Descartes' idea. We go back further than that. And what we want to present is the ideas that were given to us by Jiva Goswami 100 or so years before Descartes. And these are the basics that no one can deny for themselves. I exist. And how do I know I exist? Well, I experience. I am an experiencing thing. I am the subject of my experiences. It is I see, I feel, I like, I love. I am the subject that is experiencing this. I am the observer of otherness. I look out in the world and I see that is over there. I am viewing it from here. I'm experiencing it from here. I even view my body in that way, that there's a certain otherness about my body. And more than that, Jiva Goswami mentions, is I am also the witness of my thoughts. There is an otherness to the mind. It is something that I am observing and experiencing. And the amazing thing is that throughout my life, I am the persistent observer, the same observing, experiencing thing that I was when I was a little child. It was me there. I was experiencing then. I am experiencing now. The I has not changed. I've changed my views, my ideas, my body, my philosophies, everything has changed. But the I who does the experience does not change over time. These are pre-philosophical insights. They stand as truths that are not based on observations by outside. They're not based on philosophical musing. These are axioms that we should be building all our science and philosophy from. And they boil down to this, that we have two ways of understanding consciousness. Both are valid, but they need to be distinguished one from the other. One is consciousness as the experiencer, the sense of existence as me, and the fact that I am the subject of my experiences, and the persistent singular experience. This is consciousness, the experiencer. Sometimes philosophers call this is the inner light. This is the thing that's shining out. And then there's consciousness in terms of what we experience. And what we experience are unified and integrated moments and events within our experience. And we experience these events from our first person perspective, that I am the thing looking out and I see them from this point of view. And our experiences have phenomenal qualities. That's a particular phrase used by the philosophers, and it's important, and we will unpack it. And these aspects really boil down to being the content of our conscious experience. And in that sense, they can be called the illuminated room. So we have the consciousness, the experiencer, as the inner light, and what it shines its light on becomes illuminated as the content of our experience, the illuminated room. And the question we put to the philosophers and scientists is, we've got the brain and we know what's happening within it, but we've also know that we've got the content of our experience and we have ourselves as the experiencer. How do these three things go together? That becomes the challenge that science and philosophy has to deal with. So let's look at the components of conscious experience. As I apologize, I am going to be plowing through this quite quickly, but I hope that it gives a flavor. And if you want, in studying the videos later, it may become clearer. And there's lots more material in the Atma Paradigm series that was mentioned for you. So this is an analysis done by Christoph Koch, who worked with Francis Crick way back in the 90s, produced a book on consciousness. And it starts with this. You've got a little scene of a man walking a dog in the park. That's the external world. Light bounces off that scene and it enters our eye. This is the sensory processing part. Light hitting our eye, hitting the retina, being converted into electrical information that is sent to the visual processing areas of the brain. So we've got external world, sensory processing, neural processing. That's what neuroscience tries to analyze and correlate. And then you have this, that from all of that, there is the perception of a picture of the dog with its shape, its movement, its color. And that becomes the question. And this raises this point we made about phenomenal experience. And I want to give you a phenomenal experience. Well, by that means it's not amazing, it's maybe amazing, but it's to show you that experience is generated within the mind. Now, you can try this for yourself. Take your fingers 1 inch apart, hold it just a few inches in front of your eyes, look through, and you'll see that there's a kind of floating finger in front of your eyes. And the question is, where does that image that you are experiencing of a floating finger, where does it exist? Because it doesn't exist in the outside world. There's no little thing floating there. It doesn't exist either in either eye. So is it something that people say is mixed in the brain? But where is there an image in the brain? The brain's got electricity. It's got electrical patterns. Where's the picture? And where's this floating finger image that I see in front of me? This becomes the part of the hard problem, that the brain contains electricity. We experience that electricity as something else, as a picture. and they are not in the same format. And the format of the image that we are perceiving has its own qualities, and these qualities of what we are perceiving are called qualia. Qualia are the qualities of our inner experience. They may be related to what's out there in the world, but we're not talking about the properties of physical objects. We're talking about the properties as we experience it internally. And we have to understand there's a difference between them. We take it for granted. Our eyes are looking at something, therefore I should see a picture. But we never think, hi, because the brain hasn't got any pictures. You're not dig around there and find anything that's nicely colored in. No, it's something, the qualities that we're experiencing are being generated by the mind. And let me show you how that's true. The standard idea of qualia is often given in this idea of the red ball, that when you see a ball, you're experiencing its redness and its roundness. So there is something that it is like to experience it, which is different to experience blueness. And we're not talking about the psychological effect. We're talking about the actual raw experience of color as its redness or blueness. And there are different types of qualia. It's not just visual stimuli which give rise to qualia. When there is an air pressure, a wave comes into the ear, moves the eardrum, moves the little bones, puts pressure on the cochlea, moves the little hairs in there, and sends an electrical signal, bleep, 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 into the brain. We experience that bleep or that kind of electrical message as a sound. It could be music, it could be voice, it could be birds singing. And similarly, when we taste something, an electrical signal goes to the brain, but that signal is experienced as a flavor. Or something from the nose is experienced as a smell, or something touch can be experienced in terms of its tactile quality. And there are internal sensations, such as hunger. There is something that it is like to feel hungry or thirsty. Even pain. Pain is considered to be one of the most kind of typical of qualia experiences. We know what's happening with signals being sent from an injured part of the body to the brain and what's firing in there. We know how to try and quell those and stop that electrical activity happening, but we don't know why it should feel like something, like an ow. And emotions are also there. These are something that are felt. They have qualities which we experience. Thoughts and ideas even have qualities that we experience. So qualia are real. This is the word I want you to walk away with, qualia. It was given to me by Sadhaputta way back 40 years ago. He was the one who set me on this journey of consciousness, because he just raised this question. How come the brain has electricity, but what you experience is a picture with qualia? So qualia are real. In fact, there is nothing else that you ever know or experience in this world. Everything is a qualia experience for you. Everything you experience is a presentation of the world through the senses, and it's a presentation within the screen of your awareness, which is generated by the mind. So qualia are real. And even if they're not connected to what's out there, even if they seem to be illusory, the experience of qualia is real, but it may not give you a real understanding of what's out there in the external world. They're ineffable, hard to describe and to someone else exactly what it is you're feeling. And they correlate with physics. And an example of that is this checkerboard where you've got the squares A and B. And I ask you to look at them. Are they the same color of gray? And they don't look the same. Of course, we know the trick is they are the same, but they don't look the same. So although your eye is getting the same exact level of data from each square, your mind is generating a different experience from you. And this is very interesting, that color is not a product of the external world. Color is generated within the mind. We are told that different colors are related to the different wavelengths. Each wavelength has its own kind of signature color. And Isaac Newton was thinking like that, but then he looked at it and said, well, yeah, but where's magenta? If all the colors I experience are a particular wavelength, where's the wavelength for magenta? It doesn't exist. Now, one answer is, well, it's a mixture of red and blue wavelengths. But where's that mixing happening? That becomes the question. Because in physics, you don't mix two wavelengths and get a new wavelength. No. The two wavelengths are processed by different cones within each of our eyes. Different electrical signals are sent into the brain. So where is the mixing? In the brain? But where's the color in the brain? Why did that mixing produce that color? No, this is actually shows that qualia are mental properties. It is the mind that is actually generating qualia, not the brain. And they're subjective. And you could do a little poll if you want and ask people, do you see the color of this dress as gold and white or black and blue? Qualia are irreducible. So that means that there is nothing that we can explain about the nature of qualia from what we know of physics, neuroscience, biology, chemistry, whatever. We can't do it. So it was David Chalmers, the philosopher, was mentioned, and he told the scientists, look, what you're dealing with is easy problems, external world, sensory processing, stuff that's going on in the brain. It's complicated, it's highly complicated, but in one sense, it's the easy problems. You can figure out all that. What you can't figure out, he said, was the hard problem, how that activity within the brain produces the qualia experience of consciousness. And there's a further problem. Who is having this experience? Who is the I? Who is the observer, the first person experiencer? That becomes an even harder problem. So what we have are the easy problems of physical processing up to the brain, the nature of qualia within the mind, the illuminated room, and the observer, the experiencer, who is the inner light having the experience of the qualia. So this gives us three sets of functions and properties. And I think this is our key initial message to the scientists and philosophers dealing with consciousness, that you cannot ignore this analysis. We're not saying anything new. We're not actually saying anything controversial in any of this. We're simply saying that there are clearly three different buckets, three different types or categories of functions and properties: physical, cognitive, and consciousness. Three types of functions and properties. Often the consciousness argument gets into, well, what are they made of? What is consciousness or mind, a different substance? And that's all the foolishness that has come from Descartes' analysis and his suggestions. Physics, science never deals with what things are made of. Science can only define what things are like and what they do. What are their properties? What are their interactions? What are their qualities? What are their functions? And that's how they should be looking at these three categories. We can understand physical functions and how they operate and their properties. We need to understand mental functions and their properties, and we need to understand consciousness functions and their properties. They are very different. Each of them are real. We're not saying the external world is not real, like some philosophers. We say consciousness is real, the mind and the things we experience, it is real, and the external world is also real. And we just say, you need to explain how these other properties come to be real, and also how they come to interact with one another. So to help the philosophers, we are suggesting a framework, and it starts like this. We have the physical functions, which make up everything that we know about brain activity, how the body works and the world to a degree. We're not saying that's the only thing that's involved with any of those. But to a degree, you can analyze a lot of what is happening within the physical functions. However, there are also cognitive functions. And at the moment, I'm using this word mind in a very generalized state, not in the way that, for instance, Srila Prabhupada might use in specific reference to manaha, which is one of the cognitive functions. I'm using it in the more of the Western kind of generalized mind situation. Now, what is proposed, and we're not alone anymore in suggesting this, that you cannot explain the existence of mind from what we know of physics. Mind is not a product of physical stuff. It is not a product of the brain. Rather, what is being proposed by many philosophers now is that there must be some kind of psychophysical substrate, some kind of state of what you can call matter, which is able to produce, which is able to produce the evolutes of the physical functions and the evolutes of different levels of mental properties. So both of them come from the same substrate. They do not arise one from the other. And this dual aspect framework is shared by a number of philosophers, and in fact, there was a couple of sessions even at the same conference where someone was presenting this. For us, actually, it's interesting because this relates to our understanding of Prakriti. The psychophysical substrate is basically Prakriti in its raw state. And we know the Bhagavatam explains how that gives rise to the different levels of physical properties through the different elements, through the manifestation of the Mahabhutas with their inherent tanmatras. And that produces the objects of this world. Meanwhile, from that psychophysical substrate come the different evolutes of mana, buddhi, ahankar, which give the cognitive functions that we're talking about. And if you want to understand how they interrelate, you don't try and put these two seemingly different stuffs together. Rather, you need to understand them in terms of how physical functions relate to its substrate and how mental functions, cognitive functions, relate to their substrate. And really, what is happening in the process of our perception of the world is the passing of information. Information from physical objects is decoded and brought down to the substrate. It is transferred and then reformatted in the form of qualia within the mind. So this is the flow of information. And then the mind is not conscious in itself. It is the function of the observer shining its inner light on the content of the mind that produces our conscious experience of this apple. So the apple is there in the material world, but it has its own particular qualities which can be gathered, decoded, and reformatted by the mind. And of course, the body, the brain play a role within all of that process. But essentially, this is how qualia come to be present within the mind. And it is the observer, the consciousness function, which observes the content of the mind. And we're giving it, this observer, its own name, the Atman. Obviously, we're not original in that, but we use this term Atma as the entity of consciousness. This is the experiencer, the knower, the observer, the subject self. And it's a good one because it helps to allow us to give a more of a precise definition of this observer. And the energy of the Atma, the potency of conscious illumination, which emanates from the Atma, that we call Chitta. That is considered in the Bhagavatam, the fourth aspect of these inner cognitive senses. So the interesting thing is that we have placed the Atma outside the box of Prakriti. Why have we done that? Well, all the items within the box of Prakriti are changed by time. Time changes the physical objects. There's growth, there's transformation, there's decay, there's disintegration. And mind goes through its changes, moment to moment. You know, we've got new ideas, things flashing through us all the time. The Atma observes things that change over time. The Atma can observe this moment. When that moment moves into the past, the Atma, the same Atma, is observing the next moment and the one after that and the one after that and so on. The Atma itself is not changed by time. It's non-temporal. And that's why it is placed outside of Prakriti. And it's therefore we need a bigger box than Prakriti to put all the aspects of world and the mind and the Prakriti stuff, and also the consciousness stuff. We need a further bigger box, which we propose, and in this case, referred to as Brahman. And we may think this is complicated, but actually it's happening right at this very minute. I'm sitting here in my home near Zurich, and that's me in the real world. You're not seeing the real world. You're not seeing me there. You're getting a decoded picture of me because there's a camera in front of me taking the light and turning it into electrical activity, decoding it, and sending it down to the telecommunication substrate, which is then beaming it up into your home and through your own device, presenting it on the screen of your consciousness, and you're observing that. So what you are actually doing at this very moment in seeing and hearing me is exactly how the Atma relates to the mind and therefore relates to the rest of the world. So in this way, we can explain normal sensory perception. But this model also can handle anomalous perception, because if the information about a physical object is kind of decoded into the psychophysical substrate, is there the opportunity for the mind to access that information directly? That's called remote perception or precognitive perception. And there are a lot of experiments to be done on that to demonstrate how well the mind is able to access information that is stored in the psychophysical substrate. And also, there is opportunity for the mind to interact with other minds. And there's experiments that can be done on this, where you set up a connection between a transmitter who is in one place viewing a particular situation, and you connect them with a receiver who is able to understand and receive some of the information that is in that other person's mind. So mind to mind processes. So the framework works not only for normal, but also for these anomalous situations. But the key thing here is that the Atma isn't just an observer. It has volition. It can express its will. Will doesn't mean we have ultimate power. Will means we want to change the content of our experiences, generally for the better. So in this case, the Atma it doesn't want us to enjoy the stuff in the mind. We want to actually see ourselves as the center of all the activities that are happening within the mind. And therefore, we generate this kind of sense of our own persona, our experiencing self within the mind. And this is the ahankara. We want to be the star of the drama that is unfolding in our mind. And in this case, we want to also influence what we're experiencing. So in this case, we are taking our ideas, our plans, our strategies, our desires, and we are trying to encode them in information which can be passed on the psychophysical substrate and back up into our brain for action, for speech, and can help to specify what is happening to ourselves in this world. And the idea is like this. You have the agent, and he's looking at his blank mind, but he comes up with an idea, and that becomes a concept in digital format. That digital format can be then sent to the substrate as information, passed along from the substrate to a 3D printer, a system which can convert that raw data, which represented your idea, and can turn it into a real object. And in that way, there seems to be a connection between the will of the Atma, the intentional desires that are generated within the mind, and how they manifest within the brain and body. So this idea that there cannot be connection between mind and body that philosophers in the West talk about is total rubbish and can be easily overcome with a better understanding of the framework that is working. And we see this process happening all around us. So can mental intention really affect physical reality, not just what's happening in our brain, but even beyond that? And I refer you to the Princeton Engineering Anomalous Research called PAIR. This is a department that was set up at Princeton University. It ran a program from 1979 to 2007. Basically, they worked with these type of quantum-based random event generators. When they're left on their own, they kind of bubble along a little baseline. It's to do with the electrons going quantum for quantum tunneling. And the idea is, could participants change the rate of electrons going quantum tunneling? Could they send it up, or could they reduce it down? And very quickly, here's some of the results that they got. And the effect from each person was slight, but when you aggregate them, as you must do in these type of scientific experiments, and when you have 800,000 trials which demonstrate a large divergence from chance, you have the odds of 1 in 3 billion. This is certainly demonstrated evidence that conscious intention can influence physical systems without any direct physical interaction. So it seems to, in this particular case, it seems to work on a kind of quantum level. That's fine. That's something that also is being explored. One of the organizers of the Tucson conference, Stuart Hameroff, has had quite a bit of interaction with us. And he has a particular theory called orchestrated objective reduction, which suggests that quantum states within the microtubules, which are little tubular molecules or organelles within the brain, within the neurons, can influence the firing of the neurons. And this idea of quantum biology is now becoming more and more established. Again, there was another workshop at the conference on that. And the idea is that if intention can work on and affect the state quantum activity within the brain in the same way as it did the random event generator, then you have demonstrated a route by which non-neural brain can influence the behavior of the physical brain. This is Brenda Dunn speaking in the UK in front of this machine behind her, which is they called Murphy. It's what's called a mechanical cascade. They drop the balls down through it, and they should come out in a normal curve. And you can test people's ability through intention to vary the curve left or right to show that this effect of mind over matter, we can say, isn't just to deal with electronics and quantum states. It seems to affect even big objects, like metal balls falling through a cascade. And if you want to try out this principle of how consciousness can affect physical systems, then I suggest that you do this experiment for yourself. You cook some rice and you put exactly the same amount of rice in two different little containers, which are identical and already sterilized and ready to receive them. Same amount from the same area of the pot, so they're as identical as they can be. One you label thanks and one you label fool. The thanks, you give gratitude, and you have to be really sincere. You have to be deeply appreciative the fact that these rice grains are providing health and nutrition and wonderful flavor for your body to enjoy. They are the sustenance of our life, and they have to be appreciated. And the other you can label as fool. And for that, you have to be really, really nasty. And I know that's probably tough for many of you kind-hearted persons out there. You have to be so, so nasty to the rice. You have to condemn it. You have to shout at it. You have to blaspheme. You have to say everything nasty about it. And what happens? You put them aside and see what happens. And this is after 9 months, the full rice is starting, on the right, is starting to decay. The other rice, the thanks one, is still in good shape. This is after 18 months. The full rice is now disintegrated into a liquor and nasty smell. The thanks rice is still looking pretty good. I wouldn't serve it to my guests necessarily, but it looks nice. That's after 4 years. The rice is still doing well. What about this? After 10.5 years, the thanks rice has maintained. Now, what is happening here? One suggestion is that this indicates the power of the gunas. The idea that when you submit an object, such as rice grains, to the mode of goodness through the expression of your intention, you can help to preserve them. You can sustain them. You kind of steady their entropy. Whereas when you unleash the tamagun, onto matter, it speeds up its decreasing or its increasing entropy, and it just decays very, very quickly. So this is just one little experiment that can be done to demonstrate how conscious intention actually leads the behavior of matter within our brain, within our bodies, and in our interactions, and even in the manifestation of the world. This will become a very, very important aspect of the metaphysics that we now need to apply to different subjects in biology and in cosmology. So that's why we've taken this opportunity today to set up this understanding of the central role of consciousness. And so just to give a little summary now, we have these three elementary fundamental functions. They're all real. They all interact with one another. We can say with absolute certainty there is no evidence or theory that can explain the functions of mind or consciousness in terms of the physical functions on the left. They cannot be done. And the different conferences that I have been to, this one in Tucson, I was last year at the Association of Scientific Study of Consciousness in New York. Very good conference there. And again, there is a recognition that we have no theory to explain qualia, our conscious experience of the world. We can correlate certain things happening in the mind, but in the brain, with certain mental or conscious awareness states, but we cannot explain the nature of those states or the nature of those experiences from what we know in physics. It cannot be done. We need this new type of framework. And that is why this idea of a kind of at least dual aspect between the world and the mind is very important, that there must be some kind of psychophysical substrate which gives rise to the functions, the physical functions on one side and the cognitive functions on another. And that ultimately the interaction between non-neural mind and the physicality of our brain-body complex is an exchange of information in both directions. We are gaining information from what the senses pick up, and we are feeding information through our desires and intention into the action of our brain and body. And that there is a sharing of the qualities, the tanmatric qualities, which we call qualitative sensory data, related to each of the modalities. The modalities are the different ways of sensing, seeing, hearing, touching, and smelling, and tasting, etc. So those are the modalities. And each of those have different qualitative kind of natures. And the gunas are the aesthetic aspect of each of those qualitative sensory types. So all that information is being brought into the mind. So our mind is hoovering up the data about the sense objects and the associated gunas that they are related to. Our mind is hoovering all of that up and filling itself with that, and that becomes the content of our experience. And that's why we have to be extremely careful what we allow into the mind. There's now so many interesting studies of how the mental health affects our physical states and diseases and all those other aspects. And that is a subject which we'll look at a little bit next week. Mind leads matter. And so be careful what we gather into the mind in that respect, because consciousness relates to external reality as it is mediated to us, as it is presented to us by the experiential reality generated by the mind. We never actually contact the external world directly. It is simply mediated within the experiences, the qualia, presented to us in the mind. This is a very, very important function. This is why the whole kind of metaphysics of Sankhya, yoga, and Vedanta are built on this kind of model. And the differentiation then between those factors connected with the physical functions and cognitive functions, which are part of Prakriti, and those functions being separate from the nature of consciousness, which is beyond Prakriti. It is part of the non-temporal realm. We talked about how consciousness identifies as the Hankara persona, trying to enjoy external reality. We're not just trying to kind of watch it on the screen. We want to be part of the scene. We absorb ourselves so much in it. And in fact, we forget that both ourselves and the Prakritic world have an original source. And that original source, we can ask the question, is the source of all existence inert, i.e. just dead matter, dead stuff of whatever it is, or is it conscious? That becomes the big existential question for philosophy and science. Is the source of all reality inert or conscious? Now, in our presentation here, we have demonstrated that it seems, we cannot use the word impossible, but impractical, unlikely, difficult to the extreme to explain the nature of consciousness from what we know about matter. Therefore, it would seem very strange if the source of all existence was inert. Rather, it makes more sense that the source, the original source, is conscious, a conscious being, and is as equally an experiencer as we are. And therefore, we're talking about the original source being the original supreme experiencing entity, conscious entity. However, our nature is that we absorb ourselves more and more in the persona concept of our mind. And in doing that, we start to lose ourselves to the point where we have lost sight of our own existence as an entity of consciousness. We now fully think, I am this persona. But the problem is this persona is related to our concepts of the body and our connections to the external world. And it is going through its changes, it's going through its challenges, its ups and downs, its good times, its bad times. And it is, we see it as being influenced by time. We see it that it's heading for its ultimate demise. It is part of this temporal realm and therefore will become non-existent at some point. Death will come. So there is huge fear for the Atma because it has simply surrendered its realization of its eternal nature and handed itself over to just thinking of itself in terms of what is there in the persona, in the temporal realm of Prakriti. So time to redirect, pull our attention perhaps from just what the mind can give us. As long as we're in this body, we're going to be fed by the mind. We rely on it. We have to use it well, make it our friend. But we can direct our chitta, our consciousness, towards the relationship with the original supreme experiencer, the original source of ourselves. So that becomes this model, whilst we are not trying to say it proves the existence of theism, it is certainly can accommodate and is supportive of the theistic principle. And with that, I just wanted to kind of take a couple of minutes to talk about the Atma paradigm. This is the series that was mentioned earlier by Bob. It is a 35-part lecture series. It covers consciousness in great detail compared to what we've done today. It looks at matter and reality and all the metaphysics, some of which we have hinted at today. It then goes into apply the understanding of non-neural consciousness, fundamental consciousness, and what that would mean for biology. It doesn't mean throwing out all the science, the real science, but it gives a different perspective on how we will understand what is happening, the interpretation of data. And the same is true for the universe. Once you understand the nature of consciousness, you can better appreciate why the universe is here and how it comes to be here. And I'm going to leave that subject for some of the other speakers on the last Sunday, when they'll be giving an idea of a consciousness-based universe. So if you just go on YouTube and you tap in Atma Paradigm, the channel will come up. Or if you want to visit our Science and Philosophy Initiative, there's that material, the connections to those lectures and other things there as well. And with that, I thank you very much and hope you've had a phenomenal experience.
Thank you very much. It was a phenomenal experience indeed. Very nice presentation, Akhandadhi. There are many questions and we have time for maybe only a couple of them. So let's go for it quickly, and maybe the rest of the questions you could answer on chat, perhaps. Okay. Okay, so the first one is Adi Newmiller asks, your speech on qualia is fascinating. You mentioned that all we ever experience is qualia via the mind. How do we make sure that we don't, from this perspective, fall into the Mayavad perspective, which would say that everything is purely an illusion, as opposed to Vaishnavas who posit that the world exists, but that it is simply material and temporary?
Yes, you're quite right that many people do fall into that trap of, in the West, they call it idealism. The idea that is, if we're experiencing everything in the mind, maybe it's only the mind that exists and there isn't a reality. Jiva Goswami also deals with that seriously in the Paramatma Sandarbha. And basically, we take it from him. And the simple point is that I am having a particular experience of the mind about the world, and you're having one, and we're able to share. And there seems to be some commonality. So it seems highly likely that there is some form of external reality which is giving rise to the mental experiences that we're having. And therefore, that's why we say in the beginning that consciousness is real, mind is real, and the external world is real. And that's the picture that is provided in the Gaudiya metaphysics.
Okay, one last one. One last question from an anonymous attendee, which is, given the recent rise of artificial intelligence, how does this non-physicalist perspective treat the perception of physical reality by artificial intelligence models?
Yes, obviously a lot of interest in artificial intelligence, and part of the confusion about thinking that, for instance, artificial intelligence is similar to sentience or consciousness is because the philosophers and scientists dealing in this subject are so illiterate on the actual philosophy of science and don't understand the distinctions of consciousness, content, and actual just information processing that is occurring. There were several important presentations at that Tucson conference, and even last year by Joshua Bengio in New York. And the artificial intelligence is trying to mimic the mind. Even in our metaphysics, mind is a sort of mechanical or mechanistic system. It is not conscious itself. So AI tries to mimic that. I was just reading a paper this morning which explained how bad AI systems are at so-called seeing. We've got these large language models which are very good at processing patterns in data, but they failed abysmally even in the simplest of visual tasks. So when AI producers sometimes talk about their image recognition and ability to see, they are really stretching the facts on that. In simple terms, we do not regard AI as sentient. We can explain everything that AI does in terms of the physical processing that is happening. There's nothing mysterious in what they are able to do, other than it can be explained in the physical things. The problem with humans is we can't explain everything in terms of the physical, because we know I experience qualia, and those are things which are not explained by physics. So we can see that there is a distinction already. It's a big topic, AI, and we will all become dominated by it in due course, if not